Psalm 40:12, my iniquities have taken hold upon me so that I am not able to look up. They are more than the hairs of my head, unquote. How could this have been Jesus, since the speaker confesses to having committed many iniquities? Jesus was supposed to be sinless. Paul took Psalm 46 out of context and used it for his own motives, his own devices. And D, nowhere in the New Testament did Jesus say what Paul attributed to him in Hebrews 10:5-6. Eighth and lastly, Paul alleges in Romans 2:24, quote, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles through you, as it is written, unquote, when it's nowhere written in the Old Testament. So in summary, the evidence clearly shows that Paul not only misquoted the Old Testament, but created quotations out of nothing. To close out our critique of Paul the Apostle, who incidentally isn't even one of the 12 apostles, even though he's called the Apostle Paul, we could do no better than highlight some of his false prophecies, our fifth and final category. In 1 Thessalonians 4:15, Paul says, quote, we who are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them who are asleep, unquote. And in 1 Thessalonians 4:17 he says, we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord, unquote. Both verses prove beyond any reasonable doubt that Paul was certain that the end of the world was coming in the lifetimes of him and his contemporaries. He expected to be snatched up bodily into heaven with others and never experience death. As Frank Morrison said on page 139 of his famous apologetic work, Who Moved the Stone, quote, Paul believed that Jesus of Nazareth would return in glory to the earth, and he clearly expected it in his own lifetime. It was a belief which committed itself to vast numbers of people during the first 50 years of the Christian era, and Paul shared this belief, unquote. Yet Jesus didn't return in Paul's lifetime, and Paul and his contemporaries were never taken up into the air. 3 other verses also clearly show Paul believed Christ's coming and the end of the world were close at hand. Hebrews 1:2 says, in these last days. 1 Corinthians 7:29 says, the time is short. And Hebrews 10:37 says, yet a little while, and he who shall come will come and will not tarry, unquote. After 2,000 years of waiting, it's safe to say Paul goofed. The only realistic conclusion to be drawn from our extensive and detailed commentaries on Paul is that he is one of the most deceitful, hypocritical, inaccurate, duplicitous, opportunistic charlatans to have ever emerged on the world scene. If there's anything for which Paul is not qualified, it is sainthood. To call him St. Paul is to utter an oxymoron. We'd like to conclude today by addressing another point made by the apologists Geisler and Brooks in their book entitled When Skeptics Ask. While discussing various philosophies, the authors state on page 266, quote, the big problem with rationalism is that it's a castle built in the air with no link to reality. It assumes but doesn't prove that the rationally inescapable is real. In fact, In all its logical rationalizing, it never proves that anything real exists. There is nothing in my existence that even suggests that I or anything else must exist." Unquote. My response was, why on earth would someone need to prove that something that is real exists? By definition, if it's real, it exists. When I can see, feel, hear, touch, taste, and smell a cow, that's pretty good evidence that cows exist. If the authors feel cows don't exist, then they're required to prove as much. Again, the burden of proof lies on he who alleges. When they say that nothing in my existence even suggests that I or anything else must exist, they're admitting the very point at issue, the point in dispute. By saying in my existence, they're admitting they exist. It's often amusing to see superstitious, supernaturalistic people try to use rational thought to debunk thinking rationally. This really came home to me when I read a thick volume several years ago entitled Science and Philosophy by an arch fundamentalist by the name of Dr. Peter Ruckman. He used every rational argument he could think of to prove that faith, especially faith in the Bible, was superior to thinking rationally. He tried to use rationality to prove faith was superior. When push came to shove, he relied upon reason, not faith, to prove his arguments. If he really believed faith was superior to reason, then why didn't he rely upon faith to make his case and throw away his rational arguments? The answer is quite simple. It wasn't because he was writing for rational people, but because he too subconsciously recognized the superiority of rational thought. That completes our presentation, and please join us later for the 81st edition of Biblical Errancy Commentary, when we'll continue showing why the Bible is nothing more than the flawed composition of some fallible human beings. Thank you for listening.